Welcome to the Digital Marketing Insights podcast, brought to you by Brightside Digital.
Hi everyone, welcome to the show. I'm delighted to say we have Patrick here today, who's a data analyst. How are you doing, Patrick?
Oh, good. Yeah, thank you for inviting me.
You're more than welcome. Thank you for doing this. Patrick, can you start by telling everyone a little bit about yourself and your career to date, please?
Yeah, so I'm from Dublin. I kind of lived here most of my life. My background would have been in engineering, so I kind of studied that in college. And then I would have got a graduate job working in a biopharmaceutical company. So that's kind of where I started. Started there, kind of a graduate program there, and then after that, I would have moved into becoming an equipment engineer after this kind of a 2-year grad program. Became equipment engineer there, and then after that, kind of in the equipment engineering role, I kind of was finding my feet and learned a lot in the industry, that there was a lot of data, or a lot of the questions that people were being asked who were always looking for data, searching for data, that kind of stuff. And I kind of became a lot more interested in that side of things. So in that sense, I kind of transitioned my role a little bit, asking to work more on data projects and kind of studying a little bit more, asking, got a little bit more interested in coding. And I remember at that point of my career, I was kind of wondering, why did I study engineering? Probably should have just done a computer science, but because I became really interested in it. And then really, as part of the engineering team, I was kind of the data person, the data analyst, I suppose, really. And then I kind of worked on a lot more projects there. And then from then, I kind of was kind of stuck between two. So I decided I kind of moved company then to work as a data analyst, kind of full time. Stopped working on engineering problems. But yeah, that's kind of pretty much my career to date.
Love it. And obviously data is such a big area now, and every business is trying to work on their big data, or even just the SME kind of data that they're working in a smaller capacity. But I suppose for yourself, I suppose just to talk data for a second, do you think it takes a certain type of person? Do you feel you have that kind of analytical brain? Is that what pulled you towards data, number one?
Maybe not, actually. I kind of think I do have the analytical brain. Like, I would say that I'm very data focused. Like in even different parts of my life, I would always be looking at different parts of data. It'd be even kind of personal projects. I mean, that's a lot of stuff I just kind of interested. But I think what pulled me, and I was kind of thinking about it even before this, what pulled me towards data was more so probably the ability to answer kind of questions quickly. So specifically at work, I kind of touched on this. It was a lot more like, when you had problems, it was like, how do we use data to see what the problem is and how maybe we could solve the problem? And then the other side of it is like, it's kind of predictive side, where you can use data to try and maybe predict a problem before it happens, which can be quite could be quite difficult, especially in the kind of biotechnology industry. I mean, regulated industries kind of have they're a little bit behind other areas, like in kind of big tech and apps. Companies that develop apps, like they're kind of light streets ahead. I think maybe because you don't have as many regulations. But I think the two things, kind of to answer your question, would be more so kind of helping others try and relieve problems that they had, and you can see where the issue was. And then the other side was probably a really creative side. I don't think a lot of people talk about how creative, coding and data can be in terms of how you develop a solution. You kind of have to think in creative ways, especially when you don't have the data that's available. You kind of have to try and find, well, how can I scrape it, or how can I present it in a certain way? So yeah, there was kind of a lot of facets about it that I was really interested in. So I think that's probably what pulled me in, really.
For any kind of small businesses, let's say, listening, is there anything that you would recommend for them? Let's say they're trying to get their house in order, systems wise. Is there anything you recommend of how a business could look at their data and what they should be looking for?
Yeah, I mean, there's kind of insights in everything, which is probably a terrible answer that nobody really wants to hear. But if you have the data, I think you need to, I suppose you don't just want to dive into, okay, let's just look at data. You have to actually have a problem that you want to solve. So it's got to be fairly focused in that sense. So if you're trying to solve a certain problem, you got to have a problem statement. You've got to understand, well, what data. And in my previous role, I kind of wanted to ask the questions like, well, what data is available to you? Can that be used to solve your problem? Because you kind of want to just focus on that. And then you can start developing use cases. You don't want to kind of blindly run into it and say, oh, we have a whole load of data, let's just analyze it. That's kind of useless to nobody. But I think, focusing on the problem and then finding what data you have and then developing any sort of use case that you need to around that. That's kind of the pre-work before you start looking at having data analysts use it and data engineers as well, to try and take out, extract the data, clean it and present it. Then having clean data sets or curated data sets is probably something that's really important. So yeah, I'd say it kind of goes back to like what you're trying to solve or problem statements, and developing a strategy is probably something that you need to look at a kind of a higher level. Like, what kind of strategy do you want to use what's your strategy in terms of data? Can have and governance as well. A lot of times, the data governance is something that's kind of put on in the back burner as well, which can be tough because there's a lot going on in business, and having structured data governance can be difficult. But so it's focusing on what problems you have really is probably the main one.
And platforms, is there anything that you would recommend to people to pull in their data into a certain place? Have you got preferences? Any you want to talk about?
I suppose it's different. It's different for different industries, I guess, really. From my side of things, like from work, I'm kind of mainly only familiar with fairly unheard of platforms that probably people in the industry only know. Like this Pi is probably a huge one that we would use. I mean, it's a lot more for equipment data and stuff like that. And for other businesses, like, I mean, cloud platforms is something that cloud platforms, I would say, is probably your best bet to start. Like Azure and AWS, like they have so many different products that you can use in terms of storing data, streaming data, visualizing data. But like it's quite good in that sense. I mean, there's so much customability with it, that and you don't need to if you have a credit card, you can literally just sign up for it. It can get quite expensive quite quickly, but it's a great way to start, for a small business that's looking at, well, okay, we have this data, or data is being collected somehow. We want to store it in tables, and we want to be able to deploy some sort of application, web app, or whatever type of app you want to do. I mean, that's kind of something that I like kind of doing on the side myself, because I'm interested in. That's kind of the route that I went down as well, was using cloud resources to do it. So I'd say that's probably the easiest way to start anyway. And then you can maybe look at, there's other enterprise applications, or enterprise companies out there as well that you can look at if you want to progress further. But even Azure and AWS, they have enterprise kind of
Yeah, I'm glad you
integrated.
mentioned AWS as well, and like things like Tableau are huge platforms for presenting and
Yeah,
stuff to data.
yeah.
Can you give me an example of a really successful campaign, something that it might be in data visualization or something that you did where you felt like, okay, this was a really good success out of the brief that you were given, maybe in your previous roles?
Yeah, I'd say one of the big ones from work that I can remember anyway is I worked on a project. Maybe a lot of it was when I was part of on the data side of my role was OEE project that I worked on, which for your listeners, it's OEE is overall equipment effectiveness. And that I think was something I was really proud of because we were able to a lot of the questions, with data you want to answer is why did it happen this way, why is it like that, the developing something that, the problem happens and then you want to understand why. And it can also kind of give you some sort of business or direction in terms of working on certain problems that happen a lot more often than others. And in a production facility, I think that's something that's really, really valuable. And it's what production companies will go after a lot. They'll have some sort of OE strategy in place, and my kind of role was extracting a lot of the data from the tables that were available. So there was an OE software that was being used, and I was kind of using. I'm not sure if you've heard of Spotfire before. It's very similar to Tableau. It works on data visualization, but a lot of my whole project was kind of working on visualizing where all the downtime was for a lot of the equipment, and how much that costs in terms of the OEE. So the business had a certain percentage that they want to hit, and I had to try and visualize for different batches that they went through where were the downtimes, and how long were they, and how could we bucket them into different areas. And then booking them into different areas allowed people to kind of go, okay, well, maybe we can develop some project to try and avoid this in the future. So it's kind of a few different Pareto charts, and there's kind of a creative way to try and understand how batches start and stop, and how there's a lot of manipulation of the data to try and get that right. So I think that's probably something that I was really proud of at work. I think it really helped kind of kick off a lot of different teams work to develop their project, or even use the dashboard to try and develop projects, so that people were aware, like where can we get more productivity with it. And then I'd say probably, personally, you might have seen it as well for my post, but scoreboards was something that I kind of was a project that I was really, really proud of. I think that was that kind of personal project. It kind of came after I had moved role, but it was something that really elevated my understanding of so many different areas within data and web applications. So scoreboards was a I'm saying was for a certain reason, but
Yeah.
it's a web application that takes, it's a live score for GAA teams, club and county, both camogie and hurling and football. That basically showed kind of the live scores of all the matches on that day. It also kind of had a news section and a table section as well. So a lot of it was kind of web scraping for news and tables, and then the scores came from Twitter actually. So that was something that I was really, really proud of, because I actually learned so much. I had done a lot of training in Python beforehand, but this kind of really it really pushed it forward like that. It was just a project that I'd been interested in, and I thought that it could elevate it, and it kind of, for anyone who's looking to do coding, it's like getting better at coding, or if into data, you kind of have to know a bit of coding, is that doing a project will really test you. And the project like Scoreboards, which was something that I really liked doing. I mean, it was really tough at the start, but once it gets going, then you really start to understand it. And it was something that I was really proud of, actually.
Yeah, it was. Now looking at that, obviously with the Twitter APIs going down and up and stuff, especially in more recent times, was that something that you were always thinking, oh, this is really going to affect the platform? Because imagine going on and you can't see the scores because the API is down or a connection's gone.
Well, it wasn't even, so I kind of had built some sort of resiliency into the web app itself, and that if it went down, the certain error code, you could try and start it again. That was no problem. It was the fact that the API wasn't free anymore. It was very expensive. Elon Musk has changed the strategy of Twitter a lot. I think he was looking at Reddit, and he said, okay, we'll try and adopt their model. Where APIs now are just extortionately expensive. So that kind of just stopped it, really. So you couldn't, using the API was no longer viable. But that's kind of one that I learned a valuable lesson that, developing a web app that is relying on one API is a huge risk. Especially if you're going down the route of making this your full-time job and pursuing whatever great idea that you have. Make sure that you have some sort of backup to just one API, because connection problems can be solved. You can monitor it, or you can if you're scaling, you can have redundancy in there as well. But I think it affected a lot of people as well, in terms of companies out there who are heavily reliant on the Twitter API, and some Reddit API users as well. So I think that was I'm glad I learned that lesson now anyway.
Yeah, and like you've mentioned so many interesting things there, but in terms of web scraping, I suppose first and foremost, what do you use to web scrape? Like what platforms and how do you go about doing that?
Yeah, so Python is kind of my programming language of choice anyway, and that is what I would use. Requests, I think, is a package within Python that lets you do a lot of web scraping. For Scoreboards, I think I would have used Flask is kind of the whole platform that you would use for, which is within Python, which you use for developing the website itself. And then in the background, I would have had a connection that would scrape the scores and pass it through to the website. But I think Python is something that I became really proficient in, and it showed me kind of a lot in terms of front end and back end. So, when I started the project, I had no idea about HTML and CSS, and then I had to learn a little bit about JavaScript as well. And it kind of opened up a whole new world of interest for myself in terms of how useful these programming languages are. And then SQL as well. I mean, you can't really get anywhere without structured tables. So I had a little bit of knowledge about SQL before I even started the project, but it kind of really elevated it. Yeah. So I mean, I think a lot when you're starting out, kind of learning by doing is probably the best way of doing it. I found anyway, and that I think that was kind of like a flagship project for myself that opened up different areas that other projects that I potentially want to work on.
Yeah, that was super interesting. And like you've kind of touched on it as well, but I suppose storage then, do you have a preference for where you host your information? Is it AWS again, or is it another platform?
Yeah, no, it was AWS. I think I tried to use a little bit of Azure as well, but I was kind of, I think AWS kind of got me really. I just kind of started there, and they had all the different areas that I needed. I mean, MySQL database is kind of the one that I was using specifically for scoreboards, and it was hosted on AWS, and that was it's something that you can use to develop your application. I mean, everything's pretty much there. I mean, it's the same with Azure. Like, I mean, once you understand how this is all set up and how you can deploy it, then transitioning from AWS to Azure, I suppose for small scale projects like mine is probably not too bad, but enterprise wide it's probably a lot different. But I suppose once you understand the core principles of it, it should translate. It should translate okay between Google Cloud Platform, and Azure and AWS.
Yeah. And Patrick, one of the questions I want to ask you is around the digital industry as a whole. Is there anything that really excites you, or what would you see as the biggest opportunity in digital right now?
I suppose probably for the industry that I'm kind of working in is like for pharma, they're kind of a bit behind, I suppose, the tech industry as a whole. So it's quite an exciting space there at the moment, with using kind of data analytics software to catch up with the rest of the industry. So simple enough solution, but they're starting to catch up a little bit more, which is great. So in terms of my area, like, utilizing data has become something that's a lot more in the rhetoric of meetings, where we want to utilize data to make decisions to drive people in the right direction. So I think that understanding, I suppose, in the pharma industry is quite exciting for me, I guess. Kind of utilizing models for predictive analysis. I think it's probably something that's quite exciting. It's kind of something that's kind of taken off a little bit at the moment. So I'd probably down the predictive route. It's something that's good. I suppose there's a lot of different areas that the digital space is really progressing in pharma. So it's quite exciting.
Love it. And unfortunately, I have to ask you the last question of the show, Patrick, which I always end on, which is, if you could boil up one personality trait that you have yourself that you could pass on to others, what would it be?
I'd probably say, and it's more so for again, problem solving, it's kind of persistent. I think probably persistence and resilience is something that you'd try and bottle up and pass on to someone, because it's something that it gives you kind of the strength to tackle a problem, and then understand that it doesn't get solved very quickly. I suppose maybe that's some advice for myself as well, in that, like, I can be quite impatient with that kind of stuff. So I guess, persistence is something that I would definitely say, being able to walk away from something and then coming back to it is something that's a really good trait for anyone, really, I think.
Yeah, what a good answer as well. That's it, Patrick. If anyone wants to reach out to you, learn more about your work and speak to you, how can they reach out to you?
I suppose LinkedIn. So Patrick Brett on LinkedIn, and then I also have a kind of a passion project page, which is it's cbrett0@github.io. So that has kind of a lot of the projects that I like to work on in the background for fun.
Love it. Yeah. Thanks so much for doing the show. Thanks everyone for listening, watching, and everything else.
Thanks, Tom.